Hi, everybody. My name is Florian Schaub, and this is joint work with Kat Ramage, a former PhD student of mine who has now graduated, and Kirsten Martin at Carnegie Mellon. And this is like the placeholder AI privacy risks slide. I think all of us are aware of the many risks that come with AI systems when it comes to privacy. And one of the issues we're facing is that often data generated in one context may be used in other contexts, in particular when we talk about multi-purpose AI systems. Now, in the US, we've been taking a somewhat hands-off approach to regulating AI systems. That's not necessarily the case in Europe. In Europe, we have the AI Act. And one of the things the AI Act does is it takes a risk-based approach to regulating AI systems. And for instance, it prohibits AI systems that pose unacceptable risks to fundamental rights, and then poses obligations for high-risk AI systems, such as fundamental rights impact assessments. And the European Commission uses different risk classification factors to differentiate between the systems, deployment context, intended purpose, technical characteristics, and so forth. But in the end, if you look at the AI Act, there are big appendices that list the different types of AI systems that have been classified as unacceptable risk or as high risk. And it's not really clear how do we actually evaluate the contextual risks that come with different AI systems. And how do we actually measure the impact on fundamental rights? And this is what our framework addresses, the CASI framework. We focus our analysis of AI risks or technology privacy risks generally on how they impact human dignity. And we do that by combining contextual integrity, which many of you are probably familiar with something called the capabilities approach. And I'm going to give you like a quick overview of this. If you want to learn more about our work, please check out our paper. It's open access, and you can access it here. Can I just get a show of hands? Who has heard of contextual integrity before? OK, about half. So for I guess everyone, whether you're familiar with it or not, the idea of contextual integrity is to evaluate the appropriateness of information flows relative to social contextual norms for a given context, right? So when you share information with your doctor, what are your expectations? What happens with that information? It's probably not that it gets publicly posted, right? There are certain privacy expectations that come with our social interactions. And Nussbaum's theory of contextual integrity says, like, if the data is used in ways that is consistent with the context in which the data was generated, then that's usually acceptable or appropriate. If it breaks that contextual integrity, the data is used in other contexts in ways that are maybe unanticipated, then that's a privacy violation. And that's a very, off-the-cuff kind of explanation of what contextual integrity is, but I think it suffices for what we're talking about today. Now, practically, the way contextual integrity defines or works is it defines information flows through 5 parameters. What's the subject of the information flow? Who's the sender? Who's the recipient? What's the information type or types? And what are the transmission principles that govern this exchange of data? And those are then used to encode the privacy norms that come with that information flow. Now, one issue with this approach is that it doesn't really specify the purpose. The purposes for which data is being processed. The purpose is kind of like implicitly encoded, often in the transmission principles, but it makes it very difficult in an operational setting to kind of keep track of like, oh, OK, what is the purpose? What's the purpose specification? At the same time, purpose specification is a core privacy principle and a requirement in many regulations. So first thing we do in our work, in our framework, is we add purpose here as an explicit parameter, as a 6th parameter, with a goal of differentiating practices where the context mostly stays the same, but how the data is used and for what purposes does change. And that makes it easier to identify cases when information flows or the use of information diverges from the original intent. Now, contextual integrity is a really interesting and helpful framework, and it encodes social context norms for privacy. But one of the problems we're facing at the moment is, well, what are actually our social norms when it comes to privacy of AI systems? Right? I think we're figuring that out. And some of that figuring out creates harm. And then also, if you look at these regulatory approaches, how do we actually define the threshold between what's a high-risk system, an unacceptable risk system, and so forth. And in our work, we turn towards human dignity as a way of assessing this. And it's a big term, dignity, but dignity in its essence says, what's the inherent worth and value of a human being? And the advantage here is, while privacy might be contextual, we have a pretty universal understanding of what dignity is, and the standards for dignity are protected by fundamental human rights. Dignity is a human right, and it's defined in the Declaration of Human Rights. So that's good, right? That's kind of useful, also really difficult to operationalize. To make this tractable, we turn to Martha Nussbaum's work on capabilities. And her work says, like, well, when we talk about dignity, what dignity means varies, but there are a couple of core capabilities that need to be fulfilled, at least, to allow for a dignified life. And she identifies 10 of these core capabilities. And I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but you can see them here with some, like an intuitive definition. There are things like the ability to live a life of normal length, have bodily integrity, be able to have emotional development, free of fear and anxiety, govern our own affiliations, be able to play and experience joy, bodily health, using our senses, imagination, and thought, informed by education and protected by freedom of expression, coexist with other species, control over one's environment, and practical reasoning. Now you might say, like, okay, Florian, that's great. What does that have to do with AI systems or privacy? We'll get to that. Okay, so what our framework does, it makes two extensions to contextual integrity as a theoretical framework. The first one is that we add purpose to make it easier to track information use, and in particular, how information use changes. The second is that we leverage these core capabilities from Nussbaum's capabilities approach as kind of like a fixed set of transmission principles that we can encode as part of contextual integrity. And now when we're looking at whether an information flow is permissible or appropriate, we can look at whether it's contextually appropriate in cases where contextual norms exist. And then we can also look at, well, does it actually secure dignity, or is human dignity being violated here? Okay, let's see what this looks like in a practical scenario. And we're going to look at Foodinho, which is an Italian food delivery platform that got in trouble with the Italian DPA twice for how it treated worker data. And I don't have any particular qualms with Foodinho. We're just using it as an example where we have a baseline, right? We know that certain privacy issues have occurred, and so I'm going to walk you through how we can use this framework to actually analyze these issues and how maybe Foodinho could have anticipated and prevented some of the issues. Okay, so what was the issue in these DPA actions against Foodinho? Well, one is that Foodinho did not provide sufficient disclosure about the data it processed about its workers. They're called riders in this context. For instance, so this is a food delivery service, right? You're delivering foods to customers. And one of the issues was that Foodinho not only monitored location of their riders while they were working, but also when they were off the clock. Foodinho analyzed conversation, text and audio data of its riders. And then it used this and also the ratings it got from customers in an internal excellence rating system to score different riders and assess worker performance. That system was not disclosed. So that was the next issue, that Foodinho violated Article 13 of the GDPR, the right to be informed of automated decision-making, by running this excellence system, but keeping its existence secret from its workers and not disclosing the purpose as well as the consequences, how that was actually used in hiring or promotion decisions. And in addition to that, Foodinho also didn't provide human oversight or ways for workers to actually contest the decisions that were based on this excellence rating system. So a bunch of issues here. Now, how can our CASI framework help with this? Well, first we can look at these different issues, and we start with the first one. And the failure to disclose that this additional data was being collected and how data was used to rank the worker's performance or evaluate the worker's performance violates the practical reasoning capability. Right? So if you're unable to fully understand how your work is governed, how your performance is actually being assessed, you can't practically reason about how you want to structure your life. So what this means is that the practical reasoning capability kind of slides below the threshold that is required. We also see that the data that Foodinho collected is being used for different purposes. While customers rate food delivery for, based on the delivery quality, that Foodinho then uses the same data plus other data to then assess the performance and make employment decisions based on that data was not apparent, right? So by adding the purpose parameter here, we can see the data is actually used for two different purposes. And because the system, this ranking system, the excellence system was kept secret, it violated the core capability of having control over your environment. Right? If you don't know that the system exists and rates you, you can't really do anything about it or contest the decisions that are being made. And then to address this, there could be more meaningful disclosures that could be integrated and providing workers with ability to contest decisions. And those are the things that the Italian DPA required from Foodinho as part of the enforcement action. Okay, so it's kind of like a hindsight 2020 analysis, right? Like, okay, now if we look at the issues, how does it relate to the enforcement action? Now let's look at this more from a constructive perspective. We stay in the same use case, but we look at it. What could have Foodinho spotted these issues earlier? Right? So we're using the CASI framework for assessing information flows, and we look at whether the flows are contextually appropriate, and then whether dignity is secured or violated. So if we just focus on this particular information flow we're talking about with the rating system, we kind of look at we can model the first flow, and we can say, like, okay, our information type here is the delivery ratings that customers provide. So delivery customer is sending this information. The subject is the quality of the delivery service. The recipient is the platform, Foodinho, and the purpose is service evaluation. And our transmission principle here is reciprocity. Right? Customers want a service, and by sending information back about how good that service was fulfilled provides Foodinho with meaningful information to improve the coordination, and it benefits both the customer and the platform. So this is probably an appropriate flow. Now, if we compare this with the flow around worker evaluation, we can see that the purpose changes. Now, workers are being evaluated. It's mostly the same data, but the transmission principle is not quite clear because it's not reciprocity. The workers don't know that this is being used to assess their performance. And our context has also changed. We're now looking at labor market aspects, and there are all kinds of other things that come into this with worker protections and so forth. So now that we identified there's an issue here, we can go deeper and look at, well, what of the core capabilities might have been impacted? And we see that, as we already discussed, the practical reasoning capability and the control over one's environment are affected here. And so we can kind of see which of these capabilities slip under the threshold. Not all of them are impacted. Play is not impacted, right? And that's okay. We're looking just like which of these might be violated to help them figure out what mitigations can we put into place to bring these core capabilities back above the threshold. And one thing we can do, or Foodinho could have done, is strengthen the transmission principles. Right? Provide proper notice about the existence of this rating system, and that way mitigate the practical reasoning aspect, allowing workers to be aware of how are they being evaluated. Now, to address the control over one's environment, we can build this type of rating system to also with worker feedback, right? What would be a fair system for workers to be evaluated? How would they feel about it? And At the same time, we can also give them an opportunity to contest certain decisions that are being made based on the ratings or challenge a bad rating, but they can only do that if these systems are visible to them. And so this integrated framework we've developed can help strengthen both privacy and AI governance, both for AI systems, but also for other technical systems, by focus on human dignity as a minimum standard. It doesn't mean meeting the standard is all we need to do, right? Sometimes we want to go above, beyond doing the bare minimum in terms of respecting humans. But this gives us a standard that we can actually apply across different contexts, in addition to already existing social norms of what is expected and useful. And so it can help us move from harm taxonomies to core principles to human rights and freedoms in how we think about privacy work. And we think this is a practical approach, or can be a practical approach for risk assessment and governance, by helping decide where do we need more privacy by design investments, by informing data protection impact assessments or fundamental rights impact assessments, and help create and guide the deployment of safeguards. And we've been very focused on this work so far on the theoretical underpinnings of this approach. There's a lot more work to do to make this really practical and operational, such as better impact assessment templates and support tools for this, purpose limitation, enforcement and tracking, and so forth. So we welcome your thoughts on how to further improve this approach. And with that, thank you very much.